that someone said something negative, but it wasn't really negative about the firm, it was negative about the economy. But the tool wasn't capable of connecting the two. So like my thought was, let's create some sort of standards that we can go to the vendors and say, okay, let's define what rules you have to do sentiment analysis. Like, number one, once we define what sentiment analysis is, can we figure out if the sentiment that we're measuring is actually relevant to the topic? If our topic, if my topic is the firm that I'm working for, and the guy says something about the economy that's not relevant at all, I mean, then this thing shouldn't be counted as negative. But is it intelligence enough to even know that? And the answer is, generally speaking, no. But it turns out this one company called Lexicographics that gives all the data, but as Giles explained to me last night in great detail, it isn't that simple, because every one of these takes that data, does different things, every platform does. So even though a lot of the sentiment analysis comes from one company, the way that they're scored and the way that data is used is so different that none of these guys agree. So I think we've got to go back to the standards thing at some point if we really want to get better at this and say, let's define what these things really are and then give them to the vendors. And one of the things we've seen is that in the IAB, Internet Advertising Bureau, had done this with advertising, banner advertising like 5 years ago, and actually did kind of solve that problem to some extent, where you could correctly count things. And it took 5 years, and it took an independent body to do it, and it was expensive, and it almost didn't happen. And I think the problem with our industry is it's much worse, because there's so much inaccuracy and so much difference between these platforms but there's an example of things that don't work. I mean, this is sentiment analysis that's useless, because it's not about what I want to know. And that's really the whole point of doing the whole thing in the first place, is to get the sentiment of what I want to know about, not the sentiment of something that's nothing to do. The only connection was that the person worked for the firm. That was the only connection, but this thing couldn't tell. Another thing is that where it goes wrong is, again, there's no standards. So like everyone's coming up with a different interpretation, and I say it's like ducks that are going in different directions. You can't get them lined up. Refer to page 68 of my book. So that's quantum. That's what we call quantum. Quantum is like where the United States has different views of right and wrong, and everybody sees reality their own way. And you can swear that some people will see black as white and white and black, and will swear that it really is that way. And that's what these platforms are. They're all that way. So right now they need some sort of agreement so that at least we can decide how these platforms might be reconciled sometime in the future. But right now that hasn't happened. And then the other thing that's been brought up is the inability of the packages or platforms to handle complex emotions. I've had more luck with something like chocolate, where you either like chocolate or you don't. I mean, you can run the sentiment analysis on Techinergy or some of these other platforms, and generally speaking, I like chocolate, I want to have some, or I don't. Something really gut. If you do that about food, about sex, or about some of the other things, they generally are a little easier to score, because it's really like a gut thing. It's is or it isn't, and the strong words used. But say moronic, or Hugh MacLeod, a gaping void guy. He's all full of sarcasm and irony. What would any sentiment analysis tool make of him? And he's not that untypical of a lot of people in social media. A lot of people in social media are generating most of the noise online. So in reality, we have the problem that these tools cannot figure out what Hugh MacLeod means. And one example is that, I use Sysomos, one of my favorite platforms, and they're not really too bad. I mean, they at least break down in the content what's positive and what's negative. But here's an example of one that it said was negative, and I think when you go and look, it says, I received this last week. It was one of the paintings from Hugh MacLeod of Gaping Void. It's not actually the one I ordered, but I like all the Lynchpin series so far. Is that negative? Is there anything really negative in that?
Have you got the wrong one?
Well, I'm just saying it's on the top. Well, yeah, but I mean, is that negative because I don't. Is there anything I can do with that?
You can change its compulsion.
Yeah, I guess, maybe. So that, a system is generally better than most of them, at least in flagging, but a lot of them you look at, and the negatives won't really be negative, and the positives won't really be positive. So there is like a problem there, I see. So we look at more detail of you, because he is a sarcastic guy. And we know that the social media is full of people like him and me, and that are hard to understand. And here's an example of some of his tweets that were negative. And it says something, no good, I can't even read, there's nothing in here that looks like it's negative to me, but it flagged it as negative for some reason. I don't know why. But I pulled out just the negatives because the negative ones are more easy to figure out that they're not negative, and the positives are, so usually I go after the negative ones first, and I have that on page 71. So what I get back to with the sentiment analysis is that I kind of look at it as the dog chasing the tail. Like in kind of brought it up earlier today in some conversations one-on-one that humans don't say what they mean in the first place. We know that because search engines can't figure out what people mean. And most time, and Google's been looking at it 12 years, and they still don't know what you mean. And they've found different ways to try to figure it out, like remembering the last couple queries in your web and search history, and trying to figure out, because they know who you are, because if you log into Google, they have your whole history. So in theory, they can do a lot of stuff to try to figure out what you mean and cluster the results. And now people are using, instead of like 5 years ago where there was 2.5 or 3 words, they're using 5 words. And so Google is trying all the time to get better at figuring out what people mean. But the reality I find in a lot of cases that people a lot of times don't say what they mean in general. Like the words they use aren't always what they really mean, and sometimes they don't know what they mean. And they only find that out by having an interaction that they really mean or don't mean something. So if you take, that's one level of inaccuracy. And so Google can't really always figure it out, and they've got all the scientists in the world working on it for 12 years. And even with all this information they have on us, which I'm sure they're going to do sentiment analysis and social media one of these days, it will everything that they have more than anybody else. And now we're doing analysis of what people say, which often isn't what they mean anyway. And then we have the noise from the algorithms that can't actually detect the subject in a lot of cases from what I'm doing the analysis of what the sentence is. So like I think if we look at all of that together, there's so much noise here that's introduced in the system that it's hard for me to see how you can do sentiment analysis without humans well today. But if you wait 20 years for the singularity in quantum computers with a approximately a human brain like the data from Star Trek, you might be able to do it. But I think that's still several years away, although there are advanced applications. But that's what I've been seeing. So the best hope is like the Crimson Hexagon approach of machine learning, because at least there you can train the documents to mean something. You create the categories, and then you stay away from the single word things that don't work, and you really work with the categories. So I'm proud to say that Core is one of the first and probably the only PR firm that actually did a strategic arrangement and agreement with Crimson Hexagon, and now analysts such as myself run the opinion markets for certain of our clients. And I will say that the more time you allow to this and the better you work at it, the better the results. Garbage in, garbage out. If you try to hurry this stuff and you try to shove it in, you're not going to get good stuff out of it. But the technology is maturing. And so, I mean, the takeaways is like, what do we do now? We spend more time figuring out what we want to ask these things to do. We choose the words a lot more carefully, I feel. We allow analysts like myself to have a lot more time. We can't fit like 5 things